Gladiator 2 is the sequel to the very popular and Best Picture winner of the year 2000. This one is once again helmed by Ridley Scott. In this film, it takes place about 20 years or so since the first one. General Acacius, played by Pedro Pascal, has taken Numidia for Rome, but what he isn't aware is that a character, Hanno, played by Paul Mescal, his wife was killed in the attack. Acacius gave the order, now Paul Mescal's wife is dead. He wants revenge. Denzel Washington, playing the character Macrinus, ends up buying Paul Mescal, seeing potential in him to be a strong gladiator, and also to help him out with something he's got planned. They both recognize they can help each other, but what nobody is aware of is that Hanno is actually Lucius, the young boy from the first Gladiator film, all grown up, the son of Lucilla, played by Connie Nielsen once again. And of course that makes him the actual rightful heir to the Roman throne, instead of the, two blokes that are on there right now. When they announced that they were actually going to move forward with a sequel, I was actually very excited to see that. Ridley Scott was coming back, and I feel like, every once in a while he'll give you a House of Gucci or an Alien Covenant, which I'm not too fond of, but for the most part, his batting average for good to great movies is pretty high. And I was also excited to see that the writer David Scarpa recently wrote Napoleon, which I think is a pretty underrated Ridley Scott movie. I actually like that one quite a bit. And also All the Money in the World, which is a pretty solid thriller from him with a great Christopher Plummer performance and Michelle Williams. So I thought they had assembled a really great team here, especially with the actors that they had to board on. And I thought, there's definitely potential here to build off of what we got already. And that story potential, I think, is kind of realized in certain parts. For example, the way the first movie ends, they put a bow on it at that time, and, you could say that was the end of it and Rome changed for the better and blah, blah, blah. But what I think they realize is that actually, unless there are more people to kind of push the ideas that Maximus was kind of about and the reformation of Rome, you might get some people that just weasel their way on in and don't really change much, and that's just essentially what has happened in the world that they have established here for these past 20 years. It's pretty much the same. You got two new crazier emperors, crazier than Joaquin Phoenix was, basically doing the same thing. So I kind of like that as a jumping off point. You do have to deal with the fact that because this is a sequel and it is, gladiator stuff, you will have to hit certain beats again. So how do you navigate, those beats and make them feel fresh and new? And I can tell you, they found the way through with a very, very strong new character, that being Macrinus, played by Denzel Washington. Everyone's already talked him up so much, people saying either he's going to get nominated or he's got Best Supporting Actor in the bag. And I mean, I wouldn't be against it. He has such great stage presence. He really is this sly, trickster, puts on a big grin. He's able to mingle with everyone, but underneath the surface, you can tell there's this boiling rage. And I don't want to spoil too much of what his overall motivation is, but there is something there that is driving him. It only ever creeps out in these very restrained, very focused ways, and he is mesmerizing to watch in this film. So you have, your gladiator action scene stuff going on, but behind the scenes, you get to see the story play out from his point of view, and I really enjoyed seeing that more this time around. I'm a big fan of, behind the scenes, handshaking and betraying and stuff like that. And that's essentially what his character is all about, and I loved watching it in this movie. Another character I really loved is Pedro Pascal. He's the guy who the main character is targeting for revenge, and they go about that in a very interesting way. You start off thinking oh, well, okay, yeah, he's not the guy who killed his wife, but, he's the guy who ordered the attack that killed his wife, so it makes sense. But then when you see more of his story kind of play out, I think they actually created a pretty sympathetic figure, and it was actually kind of heartbreaking to see certain moments where he has to kind of sit and reflect on what's been happening and how he wants to make a change. I really enjoyed his presence in this movie. I think those two characters in particular, Acacius and Macrinus, are very interesting. I was leaning forward in my seat every single time they were on screen. I really enjoyed the fresh new approaches at telling the story. And as I mentioned, you have some really fun action scenes to couple it with. Ridley Scott, he knows how to make a movie. He knows how to make an entertaining and very suspenseful action sequence. From what I've heard, he captures a lot on the day. He has several cameras to capture multiple angles. And it's not that thing for me when I watch his movies where I'm like, oh, it's cutting too much. I can't comprehend what's happening. I can trace everything that's going on despite them cutting from so many different points. He just has a really strong eye for what the viewer probably wants to see. And I really enjoyed so many of the action sequences here. It's a great blend of seeing this practical kind of stunt work blended in with the practical set design that they're on, the costumes they're wearing. You feel ingrained in the world. It's honestly kind of astonishing to sometimes think, yeah, the Colosseum they're in is probably not a whole Colosseum. There's probably not, every seat filled. It's probably visual effects touch-ups, but they do a really great job of that blend of getting you immersed in that way, making you feel like, you know, the world of Rome in this movie, you know, is very well lived in, and you could like still go to it. I think there are some like technical blemishes just as far like some editing, nothing as bad as like the overuse of slow-mo in the original Gladiator. If I had to have any problems with that, it's that. I don't think it has aged very well. It's not as bad in this. There's still some like choice slow-mo parts where I'm like, you probably didn't need to do that. Some other editing stuff that happens too quick, and some visual effects for animals specifically that don't look amazing. It's kind of like, you know what I mean? So a couple little blemishes like that. But those issues aside, I do think that Ridley Scott is still able to create these spectacular looking action sequences with some really great cinematography, a really great understanding of what will entertain the audiences, what will keep them in suspense, and how long to show something in action. So you have these fun action sequences, you have really great practical effects work, you've got a story potential that is there, and they have a really great jumping off point for it. You have these two characters leading it that are so fresh and actually exciting to watch. Let's now talk about Paul Mescal. I don't want to pick on him too much. I have not seen Normal People, which I know is Ridley Scott's inspiration for casting him here. I have seen All of Us Strangers, which he's great in. He's got a good supporting role in that. But After Sun, he was nominated for an Oscar for, and it's well-deserved. Really heartbreaking stuff in there. Really great work from him. You know, he's got a long career ahead of him, and he's really talented. And in this movie, he is really great in these quieter kind of moments when they kind of use his strengths, you know, to his advantage, where he can, you know, buddy up with some of the people that he's with, specifically like one person helping him in particular. You know, there is like genuine warmth and like some kindness in him, and he can pull that off really well. And I think there even is like a strategical point as far as like the narrative of like, you have certain characters telling him, you have a gift, you have a rage in you, but then you kind of recognize, well, no, he's not necessarily all that. Like, yes, he does go on a revenge path, like that's his jumping off point, is he wants revenge against the general, but that's not all he is. And, you know, there is a good idea as far as exploring that a bit more, like that revenge, this rage doesn't define you. So that's all well and good. I don't know if Paul Mescal, though, pulls off these bigger emotional swing, like when he's talking to big crowds and he has to sway them all in one direction and get them on his side when he is like supposed to be rageful. Is that rageful, or is it just like he kind of just screamed in a way that sounded angry, maybe? You know, like there was something about the performance direction-wise where I didn't completely buy, you know, what Denzel Washington necessarily sees in him. Like, yes, he imitates a monkey that he's fighting, and that looks pretty animalistic, but there's no other points early on when they're meeting each other and all that where I could see what Denzel Washington sees. They don't do a great job, I think, script-wise or editing. I know Ridley Scott has said, like, maybe there's a 4-hour cut of this, you know, just like Napoleon. But in my opinion, they didn't really do a great job of establishing that kind of conflict and making that an integral part of the narrative, especially because so much of this movie seems to be really focused on how Lucius is now Maximus. He's reciting lines from the first movie. He's inherited all of his dad's catchphrases because, you know, retcon, Maximus is his dad. Spoilers, but they revealed it in the trailer, so you know, if you didn't know it by now, sorry, but come on, man. And he also has to, like, inherit the armor and get the sword in a very noble way. Okay, this is the thing. I don't think this needed to be like a legacy sequel all the way through. As far as Paul Mescal being Lucius, I'm cool with that. I think a better way as far as writing him is maybe him trying to emulate Maximus, because they can still have that connection they did in the first movie. He's maybe trying to emulate Maximus in the ring. But as far as like retconning it so he has to actually be kind of blood related feels like a cop-out, like just so they can, like, you know, do the lineage thing like you do in a Star Wars or a Ghost, but, you know, all these legacy sequels do it. And it also just feels like a very easy, lazy thing to do. Like, oh, because we have now said he's related to Maximus, you like this character because he is essentially new Maximus. And I don't think that's... I think an interesting movie would have been playing off of what you were given with him as a boy in the first movie, and how does he necessarily grow. Instead, he just grows into, you know, Maximus 2.0, but not as good. That's the thing also, is that because they do these moments that, you know, he's reciting lines and they're hitting certain beats the same way, you know, and he's supposed to be new Russell Crowe. But no one can really be Russell Crowe. It's kind of hard to explain. He won Best Actor, and I know he said, I don't know if I deserved it. I know some other people are like, I don't know. But, you know, when you watch that movie and in context, I can't really quite explain what it is he has. but there is something there where I'm like, this might actually be the best movie of all time. Just watching him like say anything, like, you know, contain the rage that is boiling inside of him. You know, Russell Crowe is just that kind of an actor, you know? It's not easy to replicate. But the problem is that they do the legacy sequel thing of trying to replicate those things, and it just doesn't come across. And ultimately, it causes a detriment to the performance from Paul Mescal that I am watching. I'm already not really totally buying what Denzel Washington sees in him when he, you know, tells him all of this stuff, but there's some ways you can play with that. What I was saying before, as far as like maybe the point of the movie is him kind of rejecting, I'm not a revenge guy, I'm not a rage guy. Instead, it's like, well, you are. You're getting your sweet revenge, you know what I mean? Like, you're becoming your dad, who is Maximus. We've retconned it. You are Maximus. I found that very lazy and just very uninspiring. You know, it just feels like, once again, you can't have an interesting character or a lead character in this instance unless it's related to somebody else. And that's not true. You know what I mean? Like, you can be interesting no matter who you're related to, but that's what they're telling you with this, at least. And it doesn't help that so much of like his life leading into the big battle at the start, you know, you don't see. You get little glimpses as the movie goes on in flashback. I think maybe only one flashback or two. Very quick. It doesn't really paint a whole picture for me. So you have a character where they're taking a direction with it I'm not entirely sold on, but then it's also like built on like very wobbly foundation narratively. It did not work for me overall, and it's a shame because I do think Paul Mescal is very talented, and, you know, like I said, there are moments in here where you can see that. That kind of talent is kind of obscured, though, because of the writing, unfortunately, which sucks because I was looking forward to this because of the writer, because of the duo of Ridley Scott and David Scarpa. Two other characters that I thought also didn't really work are the Emperors. It almost just feels like they figured out so many other angles, you know, committing to the Lucius thing, and you have this interesting Roman general and Macrinus, and then you have the emperors. Like, we need the emperor figure, we need someone to overthrow. And it's almost like they thought about it like, okay, we have Joaquin Phoenix, who is a weird little freak. What if we had an even weirder, littler freak? And maybe make them two, because maybe there's a way to, you know, have one of our characters maneuver and have them backstab each other. And it almost feels like they kind of stopped there, because there's not really a whole lot else to them. They did a really smart thing with the first Gladiator, which is Joaquin Phoenix is the guy. He's the emperor, he's the main guy making things worse for people, and he's also the one who had Maximus's wife and child killed. He's the guy. In this one, Pedro Pascal is the guy, but he's not. The Emperors kind of are, but that's not the focus for so much of it. And every time they're on screen, there's just a lot lacking from them as far as like development, as far as like how they interact with each other. Like, you get the gist, but it's not really enough to like say, these two are really good. And they are talented actors, Joseph Quinn and Fred Hettinger. And, you know, as far as like what their roles require them to do, they are good at what they do. It's just, you know, the character writing is not that strong. As far as like you want to root against them, you know, you want to see them overthrown. That's not the same thing here. Like, you really want Joaquin Phoenix to go down in the first movie. These guys, it's like, well, I mean, yeah, they probably are going to do that at some point. It's kind of just like, well, whatever. And I think the last thing I do want to mention, it's not historical inaccuracy, because I know people are like hyper fixating on like, this wouldn't have happened, blah, blah, blah. It's not necessarily that for me. It's mostly just like the printing press, you know, how could someone be reading an old-timey looking newspaper if the printing press wasn't invented yet? What kind of reporters do they have in fucking Rome? I don't necessarily care too much about that. I do think about like, how do you like ride a rhino into a coliseum like it's a horse? You know, that is a little, as far as like the context of the world. The first Gladiator, at least from what I remember, it's like pretty ground, like there's no parts of it where I'm like questioning like, well, how did they do this? How did this happen? Blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it kind of plays out pretty like how this might happen in real life, right? In this one, it's like, yeah, how do you train a rhino to come in like you're riding a horse? How do they even like fill up the Colosseum with that much water? I don't doubt that maybe they probably, you know, filled the Colosseum with water to do some naval battles, but like to the extent where they can like, where it's like deep, and you can fit sharks in there. And how do they even wrangle the shark? These guys, these ancient ass, how do they wrangle the sharks in there? Genuinely, I'm asking. How do you think that happens? And they have like cardboard, like little trees and little like island mount, like it's the SpongeBob Island, like decorated in there. Where does that come from? like, it's a little stuff, and I love this in like some of these movies where you'll have someone like screaming a big speech at a crowd, and it's expected that they can hear it, and you know, when it's in the confines of a coliseum, okay, maybe something sound echoing whatever, but there's a point in here where like the characters are out in a field and there's like huge ass armies on each side, and someone's giving a speech, and it's just they all kind of respond in unison as if they all heard exactly what just happened. And I find little moments like that a little silly and kind of funny. If it was just like one thing, like if it was just the newspaper thing, I'd be like whatever, but there's just these little stupid moments kind of in this movie. I'm not even entirely sold on certain ways the ending kind of plays out. I think I kind of mentioned certain things happen maybe a little too fast earlier in the review as far as like editing, like moments that could work, it's just they chopped it to make it a shorter movie and it feels a little rushed. But there's even a way like a certain plan plays out where I was like, is that, like I was trying to picture in my head, like, is there another way out? Maybe this is the only way, but something about it feels off, you know what I mean? Like there's dumb little things. What else can I say? There is a lot of great elements to this movie, whether it's the work put into the action sequences, the practical effects stuff. I really enjoyed the musical score. It's not Hans Zimmer again, but I did enjoy the musical score this time around as well. No Pirates theme anywhere, so that wasn't distracting for me. And you know, like I said, the acting and certain characters are really strong here. There's enough here to make an entertaining, watchable movie, but then you have these other things. Not that it makes it unwatchable, but just it definitely hampers down the experience. I think an easy fix would have been loosening up this focus on the whole, you know, legacy of Maximus. Like, you have to really inherit that title of being a Maximus, of being a Russell Crowe. Cut that out. That is not necessary to this. It doesn't even work for the character, as I kind of stated before. It gets a little muddled as far as like what kind of message they're trying to aim for. I think that would have been a really good fix as far as fixing some of these issues. The Emperors needed some more work. I'm not saying you need to make them like overly like menacing, like you have to like fear them, but I need to be engaged with them, and just having them be weird little freaks isn't quite enough for me. Yeah, just so many other like narrative things, little things that are included as far as the filmmaking. Like I mentioned before, the editing, some visual effects stuff, and I guess it's not world building, it's just what they populate in the world, like the sharks in the arena and all that. Like, it all around just kind of hampers down the experience for me. I'm going to give Gladiator 2 a C+. Like I said, it's totally watchable. Like, I didn't hate my time with it. It's just the more I thought about it walking out, I was like, I think I was giving it a bit more of a pass, but there's just these things about it that I find really rushed or lazy. And I think this could have been a really fantastic film, and maybe, you know, there'd be a strong case for making Gladiator 2 another, you know, Best Picture winner. A Best Picture winning franchise, if you will. 2 movies that won Best Picture, or something along those lines. And I don't think Gladiator 2 is really worthy of that title at all, although it does have its very strong elements. But if you've seen Gladiator 2, leave your thoughts in the comments below what you thought of it, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.